Snow White. The Queen gazed into her magic mirror and asked a simple question. A question that she thought she knew the answer to. Magical mirror, is there anyone more beautiful than I? But the magic mirror did not reply. For the Queen had been asked this very question 6 years before, and the answer back then had made her very angry. As you know, it's not nice when people get loud and cross. What a beautiful day it is, my Queen, said the mirror, trying to avoid the question. Yes, yes, said the Queen, combing her golden hair. Now, please answer the question. I need to know that I am the fairest in the land. Am I not? There was silence. It took a hard stare from the Queen before the mirror finally answered. I'm afraid you are not. Well, just as the mirror had expected, the Queen became very angry very quickly. In fact, she was about to pull the mirror off the wall and smash it to pieces when she stopped suddenly. Wait, she said. If I'm not the fairest, then pray tell, who is? You're not going to like this, said the mirror. Out with it, fool, or I shall break you. Very well, my Queen, but please remember, I'm just the messenger. Speak or be smashed, said the Queen, her face tense with rage. Snow White, said the mirror. Snow White is the fairest in all the land. Wait, what? The Queen could not believe her ears. Snow White? That little brat I ordered the huntsman to get rid of years ago? The very same. Typical, said the Queen, getting up from her dressing table and lacing up her riding boots. If you want something done, do it yourself. And with that, the Queen marched to the royal stables. As you've probably gathered by now, the Queen was not the nicest of humans. She believed that being beautiful was the most important thing, which, as I'm sure you know, is not true at all. The Queen rode straight to her trusted witch, Ethel Grackle, who lived in a small hut by the edge of town. Ethel used her crystal ball and discovered that Snow White was still alive and was hiding in a cabin deep in the deep forest. The witch then handed the Queen a small bottle of liquid. A disguise, she said with a wicked laugh. It'll turn you into an ugly old hag for a short time. Perfect, said the Queen, smiling. She'll never know it's me. Then give her this, said the witch, handing her an apple laced with strong poison. The Queen smiled and turned to leave. Careful, your Majesty, Grackle cried. Take more than a sip and ye shall stay ugly forever. Well, the Queen nodded, placed the bottle into her knapsack, and then left without another word. Meanwhile, in the deep forest, in a large log cabin, Snow White was sitting at a kitchen table with her friends. The 7 dwarfs were remembering how they had taken her in all those years before. I was so little, said Snow White, looking at the chalk lines on the wall where they had marked her height. You were, said Arthur, but so cute. How could we not take you in, said Brian. Yes, said Charlie, you had nowhere else to go. David, Earl, Frank and Graham all laughed. They had arrived home one evening 6 years before to find Snow White sat at this very table. The huntsman had explained to the dwarfs that if the Queen ever found Snow White, she would be in grave danger, so they vowed to keep her safe. Right then, said Brian, slamming his hand on the table. Work's to be done. The 7 dwarfs took their plates to the sink, put on their boots and coats, and left the cabin with a cheery goodbye. Little did they know that this day was no normal day. Snow White sat at the table smiling and gazing out of the window, enchanted by the beautiful birdsong from the trees nearby. there was a knock at the door, and she opened it just a little to spy a wizened old lady with a large basket of apples. "Yes," said Snow White. Can I help you?" "You're very kind, dear. I was just on my way through the woods to my sister's house to sell these apples at the market. But my memory's not what it used to be. Do I follow this path to get to the town?" "Yes," said Snow White. "That's right. Follow it all the way." Snow White looked at the delicious red apples and licked her lips. "They're 2 guineas each," said the old lady. "But as you've been so helpful to me, then do take one for free." "Are you sure?" said Snow White, a little relieved as she had no money. "Of course," said the old lady. "Go on, have a big old bite." Snow White bit into the apple and instantly fell to her knees. In that moment, the old lady transformed back into the queen and pushed her way into the cabin. Snow White clutched at her throat, struggling to breathe. "Foolish girl," cackled the queen. "You're pretty, I'll give you that. But what good is it if you are dead?" The queen shook the bottle of magical liquid. "A sip of this potion turned me into a hag, and you were fooled. Pathetic. Oh, don't worry, the poisoned apple works fast. You'll hardly feel a thing." Sadly, the queen was right, and moments later, Snow White took her final breath and died. The dwarfs returned home late that evening, surprised to see that the fire and the candles had all gone out. They walked through the dark doorway and called out to Snow White. Where could she be? There she was, dead on the kitchen floor. The girl they had sworn to protect, her face as pale as snow, and her lips as red as a rose. The 7 dwarfs broke down and wept. With heavy hearts, and knowing that no worse fate could become her now, they carried Snow White through the forest and back to the palace gates, demanding to see the king and queen. "Your Highness," Charlie said to the king with a tear in his eye, "we are sad to bear such news, but many years ago we swore to protect your daughter Snow White with all of our power. But on this day we have failed, and we are deeply sorry." The king could not believe his eyes. He thought that his daughter Snow White had died many years before in a hunting accident. That is what the queen had told him. The queen, of course, said nothing, but smiled to herself. She was excited to ask her magical mirror who was the most beautiful in the land now. The dwarfs lowered Snow White's body onto the palace steps, but as they did so, Snow White woke up, coughed, and looked around. "Where am I?" she said quietly. The dwarves stood back in shock as their friend sat up alive. Good fortune had fallen on her, and she had not swallowed the apple. It had simply become stuck in her throat. The poison had not killed her, only put her into a deep sleep. Her friends rushed to her, crying with joy and hugging her tightly. The king ran down the steps and held his daughter, weeping with happiness. "My sweet girl, how I have missed you, but how lucky I am to have found you once again." "Father," said Snow White, still drowsy and a little confused. "You are home at last," said the king, his heart bursting with joy. Meanwhile, the queen, realizing her wicked plan was ended, took out the bottle of magic potion to transform into an old woman and slip away unnoticed. She was about to take a sip when Snow White pointed at the queen. "She did it! She tried to kill me!" "What?" said the king. "Twice!" The guards seized the queen and she struggled to get free. "Hands off me, you fools!" deep down, the king had always known that the queen could not be trusted. "It seems I am the fool here," he said sadly. "Is it true, my queen?" "Of course, you crusty old buffoon," spat the queen, her face contorted into an ugly scowl. The king shook his head. "I was blinded by beauty, and look what it has done to my family." "But what is this?" said the king, taking the vial of magic potion from the queen's hand. Snow White recognized the bottle right away. "It's a magical liquid. She turned herself into an old woman to trick her way in." "Magic indeed," said the king, eyeing the potion with interest. He removed the stopper and held it out to the queen. "Drink it. Drink it all." "What?" said the queen. "No. Why?" "Drink it," said the king once again. "I will not," replied the queen. "Hold her head still." And the king poured all of the liquid into the queen's mouth. She tried to spit it out, but it was too late. The potion started to take effect, and she turned into the old hag once more. But this time, it was forever. The queen screamed, a shrill cackle that echoed throughout the castle. "You don't know what you've done! I shall be ugly!" And she fell to her knees and sobbed. The king looked upon her with pity. "My queen, you have always been ugly, only now everyone can see it. Take her away." So the story of Snow White ended happily. The king heard the whole story of how the 7 dwarves and the huntsman had saved his daughter's life and kept her safe. He told them he would be eternally grateful for their kindness. And so, with the wicked queen locked away in the deepest dungeon, all was finally well in the kingdom. I know what you're thinking. Is there a prince in this story? Well, perhaps there was and perhaps there will be, but a story about an ugly, jealous queen and 7 good dwarves is the story I wanted to tell today. So there you have it, and there it is.